Camila Torres was the kind of woman people admired from a distance. At 52, she had built an empire with nothing more than grit, intelligence, and a relentless work ethic. The owner of La Reina Roja, a celebrated chain of Mexican fusion restaurants across California, Camila was known for her impeccable taste and unwavering standards. Her name was synonymous with success in the culinary world, a pioneer who turned traditional flavors into five-star dining experiences. But behind every empire is a cost. Camila's rise hadn't come easy. She started with a single taco truck in East LA, working 16-hour days, sleeping in her van, and pouring every penny back into her dream. Over the span of 2 decades, she expanded that one truck into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. She became a local celebrity, featured in magazines, invited to speak at business conferences, even offered her own cooking show, which she declined. Fame had never tempted her. Control had, and that same need for control had quietly eroded her personal life. Camila had been married once, briefly. Her ex-husband, a quiet accountant named Daniel, had tried to support her, but he couldn't compete with the adrenaline-fueled pace of her ambition. He grew resentful of her long nights and her phone calls during dinner. She grew tired of explaining herself. The marriage died quietly. No scandals, no big betrayals. Just the slow suffocation of distance and unmet needs. They divorced after 7 years. She never remarried. Now, with her empire sold for a generous sum and retirement officially underway, Camila found herself in unfamiliar territory. Still rich, still powerful, but deeply alone. Her days no longer started at 5 a.m. with vendor calls or ended with a glass of wine over spreadsheets. Instead, she woke up late in a silence that echoed louder than any restaurant kitchen. Her phone, once buzzing nonstop, now sat untouched for hours. She traveled occasionally, Barcelona, Kyoto, Buenos Aires, but the beauty of those places only seemed to emphasize the void she felt walking through them alone. Camila had no children. By choice. She'd always said she was married to her business. Her only close family was her niece, Lucia, a 25-year-old grad student studying criminal psychology in Spain. Lucia was bright, loyal, and one of the few people Camila truly trusted. They spoke every weekend without fail. Still, even with Lucia's voice in her ear, Camila felt the creeping presence of something she'd always managed to outrun: loneliness. She had the kind of life people envied: wealth, freedom, name recognition. But as she sat alone on the patio of her Los Angeles home, watching the sun disappear behind the hills, Camila wondered if she'd traded too much for too little. She hadn't always been this composed, this sure of herself. Long before she became the Camila Torres on magazine covers, she was just a teenager in East LA, flipping tortillas in her mother's tiny kitchen while the scent of simmering mole clung to the walls. Her mother, a seamstress by day and a miracle worker in the kitchen by night, taught her how to make everything from scratch, but more importantly, how to stretch a meal when there wasn't enough to go around. Camila's ambition was born in those cramped rooms. She remembered being 17, sitting on the floor of her bedroom, drawing mock logos for a future restaurant on the back of old receipts. Her father had died when she was 8. There was no college fund, no guidance counselor talking about scholarships. Just grit and the quiet belief that she had to carve her own path. At 23, she launched her first food truck. It was rusty, the fryer leaked oil, and she worked alone, driving, cooking, and serving until her knuckles cracked from a strain. She once missed her best friend's wedding because the generator failed, and she couldn't afford to close even for a day. That decision haunted her more than she'd admit. But at the time, she believed sacrifice was the price of legacy. Romance had tried to catch up with her more than once. A kind musician named Javier, who left love letters on her windshield. A charming sous chef from Guadalajara who wanted to build a life together. But every time she tried to let love in, it clashed with her momentum. She told herself she'd have time later. After the next expansion, after the next award, after she proved herself to the world. But later never came. Now, sitting alone with her empire behind her and only silence ahead, Camila couldn't help but think. Maybe she'd won the battle, but lost the war. Then came the trip to Mexico. It started as a whim. A private beachfront resort in Tulum. 5 stars, no media, no fanfare. Just ocean breeze, handmade margaritas, and the sound of waves hitting the shore. A place to disconnect. Or maybe to find something she didn't even know she was missing. Tulum had a way of slowing everything down. The breeze off the Caribbean sea carried a softness that made you forget the world beyond the shoreline. The sun was warmer, the air thicker, and time moved like honey dripping from a spoon. For Camilla, that was exactly what she needed. She spent her first 3 days at the resort in quiet contentment. Morning yoga classes, afternoon beach walks, long dinners with good wine, and no expectations. She brought books, but barely opened them. For once, she let herself just be. Then, on the 4th evening, he appeared. But Ryan hadn't just appeared. He had been watching. From the moment Camilla checked into the resort, he took notice. Not just because of her elegance or the quiet power in her posture, but because he already knew her name. He'd scanned the guest registry using a contact at the front desk, a bellboy he had paid in pesos and promises. From there, it was a matter of cross-referencing. He searched social media tags, scanned public records, and pulled up articles. La Reina Roja, Camilla's restaurant empire, came up immediately. He found her business sale announcement, her TEDx interview, even her rejection of a major network cooking show. It was more than enough. He watched her movements for 3 days without ever approaching. Saw her doing yoga at sunrise. Noted the way she always requested her coffee strong and unsweetened. Observed how she kept to herself even in social spaces. She wore no ring. Her phone rarely rang. Her smiles were polite but distant. Perfect. Ryan had done this before, and he'd learned that the most effective con started not with charm, but with silence, with study, with precision. He didn't need to seduce with flowers or flattery. He needed to become exactly what she didn't know she was missing. Each move was calculated. When to appear, when to speak, how to tilt his head just enough to seem interested but not intrusive. He rehearsed his backstory. Puerto Rican roots, a tragic loss, a drifting soul looking for peace. He even pre-selected the cocktails he would recommend, depending on her order, his way of creating chemistry without her realizing it. When he finally stepped behind the bar that 4th evening, he wasn't improvising. He was performing. This was his stage. And Camilla, despite all her brilliance and resilience, was exactly the audience he needed. He was behind the bar, mixing cocktails with smooth precision and easy charm. Ryan Vega, the name stitched neatly into his uniform. He couldn't have been older than his mid-20s, tall, sun-kissed skin, toned arms, and a smile that landed somewhere between sincere and dangerous. The kind of man women noticed, whether they admitted it or not. Camilla wasn't looking for conversation. She had her usual reposado tequila on the rocks and took a seat at the far end of the bar. But Ryan noticed her. More importantly, he targeted her. "Good choice," he said as he slid the drink her way. "You don't strike me as a frozen margarita kind of woman." Camilla raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment or an insult?" He smiled. "A compliment. Definitely. You seem like someone who knows exactly what she wants." She smirked but didn't reply. A younger Camilla would have shut the conversation down immediately. But something in his tone, not pushy, not cocky, just confident, made her curious. She didn't flirt back. She didn't need to. Her silence was enough to invite more. Over the next few days, Ryan always seemed to be around. He never forced the conversation. He just appeared, a smile across the pool deck, a polite good morning as she passed the gym, offering her a fresh towel before she asked. Small gestures, always perfectly timed. Eventually, she asked him where he was from. He said Puerto Rico, but mentioned he'd bounced around a lot. Military brat, he added. Never really had a home. He spoke with warmth, but there was always a hint of something unspoken in his eyes. A sadness that felt rehearsed. A story he let hang in the air, just long enough to pull her in. He told her about his struggles, working 3 jobs to help his mom after his dad died, dropping out of college, moving to Mexico because it's the only place I've ever felt peace. He said he liked older people, They don't play games like the girls my age. And he never called her ma'am. Never made her feel old. He listened when she talked about her restaurants, about the years she spent building them. He asked questions about her travels, her childhood, her love for cooking. He even complimented her hands, strong hands, he said, like someone who built her own life. No one had noticed her that way in years. Still, Camilla kept her guard up, at least at first. She knew how men could be, especially younger men, especially when money was involved. But Ryan never once asked about her wealth, never hinted at her success. He made her feel like a woman, not a bank account. And so, little by little, the walls came down. They had dinner one night on the beach. Her suggestion, candlelight, wine, music from a nearby wedding drifting on the wind. As they watched the moonlight shimmer over the water, Ryan leaned closer. I don't want to overstep, he said softly, but being around you just feels easy. Natural, like I've known you longer than a week. Camilla didn't know how to respond. She was flattered, yes. Nervous, definitely. But above all, she was surprised by how much she wanted it to be true. I'm not usually this open, she admitted. I know, he said, but I see you. 3 words. So simple. So dangerous. Camilla wasn't thinking about patterns or red flags. She was thinking about how it felt to be wanted again. But someone else, far away, might have seen that same look before. The next morning, Ryan brought her coffee just the way she liked it. She smiled and called him sweet. He leaned in with a look that would melt steel. Marry me, he said. She laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Ryan wasn't laughing. Not even a little. Camilla had always believed in logic. In contracts. In contingency plans. She had negotiated multi-million-dollar leases without flinching. She had sued former partners, downsized entire restaurant teams, and walked away from toxic relationships with her head held high. But nothing in her life had prepared her for the moment Ryan Vega, 26, beautiful, sincere, looked her in the eye and said, "Marry me." At first, she laughed. It was instinctual, a reflex to deflect something that felt wildly out of place. But Ryan didn't laugh with her. He kept his gaze steady, his voice calm. "I'm serious," he said. "I know it's fast. Maybe it's crazy. But I've never met anyone like you. I don't want to let this go." She stared at him, stunned. "Ryan, you've known me for what, a week?" "I knew the first night I saw you," he said. "You were sitting at the end of the bar, like you owned the world. Not in a flashy way, just steady, calm, like you didn't need anyone. And that's exactly why I wanted to know you." Camilla felt her throat tighten. She didn't recognize the woman he was describing, but she wanted to. Still, she was no fool. "You understand I'm 26 years older than you?" He nodded. "And I've never cared less about age in my life." "I can't give you children," she added, more softly. "I don't want children," he replied instantly. "Not in the traditional sense. I just want you, whatever that looks like." The words wrapped around her like warm air. Part of her screamed to be cautious. The other part, the part that had spent too many nights alone in a cold house, wanted to believe him. And so, after another long pause and a long exhale, Camilla said yes. The wedding was small, intimate, just as Ryan wanted it, or so he claimed. He told her he had no family left, said his mother passed away 2 years ago, that he wasn't close to anyone else. Camilla didn't press. She wasn't exactly surrounded by loved ones herself. Her niece, Lucia, was in Spain and unreachable on short notice. A few friends had drifted away since she sold the restaurant. It was just easier to keep it quiet. They married on the beach under a simple canopy of white linen, the ocean just a few feet away. The resort provided a photographer, a justice of the peace, and 2 employees to act as witnesses. Camilla wore a flowing white sundress and went barefoot in the sand. Ryan wore a loose white shirt and khaki linen pants. In the photos, they looked like any couple madly in love, escaping the world to make a memory no one could interrupt. But underneath the beauty, the music, the ocean breeze, something darker was settling into place. Ryan held her hands during the vows, stared into her eyes as if she were his only truth. His voice trembled slightly, just enough to seem sincere. He promised to love her, to protect her, to grow old beside her. Camilla felt tears in her eyes as she repeated her vows. She hadn't felt that kind of raw emotion in decades. After the ceremony, they dined privately on the terrace of their honeymoon suite. Champagne, lobster, chocolate truffles. Ryan toasted to their future and played soft music from his phone. They danced under string lights. Everything about the night felt surreal. For Camilla, it was a moment suspended in time, joyful, magical, and deeply vulnerable. But for Ryan, it was the final step in a carefully orchestrated plan. He had done this before, twice in Asia, once in Europe. Every time, it started with romance and ended with inheritance. Elena Vargas never doubted him, not even on the night she died. She was 60, powerful, and newly retired from her booming real estate firm in Barcelona. She had moved to the Philippines for a fresh start. Warm beaches, gentle people, and the kind of silence she thought only the ocean could offer. And then came Alejandro Cruz, the charming manager at her hotel who remembered her coffee order after one day and offered her an umbrella before she asked. Handsome, soft-spoken, always attentive, just like the others before her. Their whirlwind romance made her feel like a teenager again. They danced barefoot at sunset. He called her Mi Reina. He said he didn't care about her age or money, only the way she made him feel safe. 3 weeks later, they married under palm trees in a private beach ceremony with 2 staff members as witnesses. On their final evening together, Elena had cooked for him, a simple Spanish tortilla and a glass of wine. He told her he loved her, held her hand as she smiled. An hour later, she collapsed. He called for help, too late. By the time emergency responders arrived, Elena was unresponsive. Her cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. The body was cremated within 48 hours at Alejandro's request, citing religious beliefs and emotional trauma. There was no autopsy, but the neighbors remembered strange things. A nurse recalled how he insisted on keeping her medical file just to handle things personally. A clerk at the insurance office remembered Elena had updated her beneficiary form just 2 days before her death with his name. And like that, Alejandro Cruz disappeared. Elena's sister had suspicions, but no proof. No body, no case, just a hollow urn and silence. He already knew that Camilla's assets were vast. Her digital trail was clean, but not invisible. He had found public records about the sale of her restaurants. He'd seen her name in articles. He knew she was wealthy, unmarried, and recently retired. Vulnerable. That was what made her perfect. But Ryan had learned from his past mistakes. This time, he would move faster, be more strategic. No accidents, no risk of violence, just control. Quiet, subtle control. And it would all start the morning after the wedding. The next day, he brought her breakfast in bed, fruit, espresso, and a handwritten note that read, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Thank you for trusting me." Camilla smiled at the gesture. She felt young again, alive. And while she sipped her coffee, Ryan sat beside her on the bed and casually mentioned something he'd heard from a friend about financial benefits for married couples who shared international assets. He spoke carefully, gently. "Not that we need to do anything now," he said, "but eventually, if we consolidate things, you'll actually pay less in international tax penalties. There's a way to make me a partial beneficiary, just on paper, for insurance stuff." Camilla hesitated. Ryan leaned in, kissed her forehead. "Only when you're ready," he whispered. "No pressure. I just want to protect what you've built. That's part of loving someone." And with that, the hook was set. The night before she died, Camilla couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to Ryan, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. He was snoring lightly, one arm draped over her waist. He looked peaceful, too peaceful, almost rehearsed. Something had felt off that evening. Earlier, she had walked past him on the balcony. He hadn't noticed her standing nearby. He was on the phone, whispering in Spanish. The only words she caught were, "Yes, it's done. 2 days, max." When she asked who he was talking to, he smiled and kissed her forehead. "Just my cousin," he said. "Travel mix-up. Nothing serious." Camilla wanted to believe him. She chose to believe him. She told herself she was overthinking. that she was just nervous about blending lies again at her age. That Ryan, despite his youth, had given her a kind of joy she hadn't felt in decades. But deep inside, there was a whisper, one she'd spent her whole life trusting, until now. Something's not right. Still, she turned to face him. She kissed his cheek, and she let sleep take her. It was the last night of her life. 2 days after the beachfront wedding, the dream unraveled. It was a quiet morning. The sun had just begun to rise over the Tulum coast. Guests at the resort were already enjoying breakfast on the terrace. The ocean breeze was calm, the air warm and sweet. For most, it was another perfect day in paradise. But inside room 304 of the Coral Vista Resort, Camila Torres lay lifeless on the bathroom floor. A housekeeper found her just before 9 a.m., after multiple knocks on the door went unanswered. She had come to deliver breakfast and fresh towels. The scene inside was chilling in its stillness. Camilla's body partially submerged in the bathtub, a silk robe twisted beneath her, her head tilted back unnaturally. A trail of water pooled onto the tile. The hotel immediately contacted local authorities and medical responders. Ryan was nowhere in the room when they arrived. He returned 20 minutes later, walking up the hallway with 2 cups of coffee in his hands. When he saw the paramedics wheeling Camilla out on a stretcher, her face covered by a white sheet, he dropped the cups and collapsed to his knees. To the staff and police, he looked devastated. He kept repeating one sentence. I only left for 15 minutes. I swear, I only left to get his coffee. According to the initial report, there were no signs of forced entry, no visible bruises, no trauma wounds, and no indication of foul play. Her cause of death was listed as an accidental drowning, likely due to a slip or medical episode. A small bottle of prescription heart medication was found on the bathroom counter. The label showed Camilla had an existing condition. The explanation was simple, clean, and believable. Almost too believable. At the hospital, Ryan played the grieving husband to perfection. He cried softly. He asked about arrangements. He told the attending physician how much Camilla had meant to him and how they had just gotten married 2 nights ago. He showed photos from the wedding, sun-kissed, romantic, full of smiles. The staff consoled him. The resort offered their deepest condolences. He was treated as a victim, not a suspect. No one questioned how quickly he asked about her belongings, or why he immediately requested access to her passport, hotel safe, and phone. No one paid much attention when he asked about the process of claiming her remains or whether life insurance policies could be transferred internationally. It all seemed like the actions of a man in shock, until Lucia Torres got the call. Lucia, Camilla's 25-year-old niece, was in Madrid finishing her master's degree in criminal psychology. When she received news of her aunt's sudden death, her instincts flared. The story didn't make sense. She died in a bathtub 2 days after marrying a man half her age, and I never even met him. Lucia had spoken to Camilla just 4 days before the trip. There had been no mention of a wedding, no indication of illness. And Camilla was not someone who made impulsive life decisions, especially about love or money. Lucia flew to Tulum the next day. At the resort, she met Ryan for the first time. Lucia met Ryan for the first time. His smile was soft, his manner respectful. But to her trained eye, it felt too perfect. She asked him a few simple questions. His answers were smooth, practiced. She wasn't grieving anymore. She was profiling. The smile faded from Ryan's lips, just for a beat. Look, he said, voice quieter now. I understand this is hard for you. But Camilla made those choices herself. Maybe they surprise you, but that doesn't make them suspicious. Lucia stared at him, unblinking. She was the most deliberate person I've ever known. If she trusted you that quickly, then either she changed or you were very, very good at pretending. Ryan's jaw twitched. Are you accusing me of something? Lucia shrugged. Should I be? They sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken tension. In that stillness, Lucia watched him closely, the flicker of discomfort, the way he glanced toward the resort entrance as if checking for an exit. And in that moment, she knew. He wasn't just grieving. He was hiding. When she asked about their wedding, Ryan brushed off the details. When she asked about his family, he said, "There's no one left." The first red flag appeared when Lucia reviewed her aunt's financial email notifications. Camilla's accounts had been quiet for weeks. But just one day before her death, she had added Ryan as the primary beneficiary to 2 life insurance policies and adjusted her will through an online platform. Lucia froze. Her aunt was careful with every decision she made. She didn't do anything important without consulting someone. Why would she suddenly change her entire estate plan for a man she had known less than 2 weeks? And more importantly, why was Ryan already packing to leave Mexico? Lucia turned to the one tool she trusted more than anything, her training. This wasn't just an accident. It was a setup, and she was going to prove it. Lucia Torres wasn't just grieving. She was investigating. She had spent the flight from Madrid reviewing every message, bank alert, and email her aunt had ever forwarded. By the time she landed in Mexico, she wasn't just heartbroken. She was suspicious. And after meeting Ryan Vega in person, those suspicions turned into certainty. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the way he avoided eye contact, in the 2 perfect stories about their romantic connection, in the way he kept referring to Camilla in the past tense like she'd been gone for years, not 2 days. Lucia had grown up watching Camilla make hard decisions. Her aunt was cautious, deliberate, almost annoyingly calculated when it came to matters of trust. Yet somehow, she'd married a 26-year-old stranger on a whim and handed over the keys to her estate. No, that wasn't Camilla. Lucia knew this wasn't just about grief. It was about truth, and she was prepared to dig. Her first move was simple. Log into Camilla's cloud storage using save passwords. There, she found updated financial records, including a scanned copy of a revised will dated 48 hours before her death. The signature was hers, but the timing was chilling. Just 2 days after saying, "I do," Camilla was dead, and Ryan stood to inherit nearly $2 million in insurance and assets. Lucia reviewed the life insurance documents. Both had recently been updated with Ryan Vega listed as the sole beneficiary. Before that, no one. Camilla had never even assigned a recipient. She'd always said, "It'll go to Lucia when the time comes." And now, just like that, it wouldn't. Lucia's hands trembled. But she wasn't angry. Not yet. She was focused. Next, Lucia paid a local private investigator to run a background check on Ryan Vega. What she got back changed everything. There was no clean trail. In fact, there were almost too many trails. Over the past 5 years, Ryan had used 4 different aliases across various countries. Marco Rivera in the Philippines, Julian Mendez in Thailand, and Alejandro Cruz in Spain. Every time, he worked briefly in hospitality, often at luxury resorts. And in every location, a pattern emerged. Asterisk older, wealthy woman. Asterisk sudden romance. Asterisk fast marriage. Asterisk unexpected death. Asterisk large inheritance quietly transferred. Asterisk then Ryan, or whatever name he was using, vanished. 3 previous wives had died. One from a fall on a yacht. One from a heart attack in her sleep. One, like Camilla, in a bathtub. Each case had been ruled an accident. Each woman had recently changed her will. Lucia sat in stunned silence as she read the reports. Her heart pounded, her palms cold. She wasn't chasing a bad husband. She was chasing a serial predator. Lucia gathered everything she had. Bank statements, signature comparisons, medical reports, passport photos from different identities. Then she contacted the U.S. Embassy and Interpol, filing a formal complaint supported by the documentation. She shared her findings with local Mexican authorities, but progress was slow. Ryan, meanwhile, was preparing to leave. Lucia found out through a hotel staff member that he had booked a shuttle to Cancun International Airport under a different last name, Ryan Cortez. He planned to fly to Argentina. That's when Lucia made the call that changed everything. Using a contact from her graduate program, an investigator in the U.S., she requested emergency surveillance on Ryan's movements through official diplomatic channels. She didn't have a badge, but she had evidence. And that was enough. Or so she thought. Lucia's first visit to the local police station in Tulum was sobering. The officer on duty nodded politely, but seemed unimpressed by the stack of documents she presented. He flipped through the printed records, barely skimming the details, then offered a half-hearted response in Spanish. "Señorita, this looks like family conflict, not criminal evidence." Even when she mentioned the aliases, the overlapping deaths, the financial motive, he raised an eyebrow, but shrugged. "You say he's dangerous," he said, "but this man has no charges, no warrants. Just a grieving husband, Señora." Lucia walked out of the station frustrated, her heart racing with helplessness. Her next step was the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. That required a 90-minute flight she hadn't planned for. There, an illegal attaché listened to her full story. He was more sympathetic, but still cautious. "We believe you," he said, "but international prosecution is complex. You need cooperation from local authorities first. And unless you can prove imminent flight or ongoing danger, he might be gone before we act." Lucia's voice cracked as she responded, "By the time you gather red tape, he'll be on another beach, picking another woman." It wasn't a dramatic line. It was the truth. What haunted her wasn't just the thought of losing Ryan. It was the thought of someone else becoming the next Camilla. Back in Tulum, she called in a favor from her thesis advisor in Madrid, who had once worked with Interpol on fraud-related behavioral cases. He pulled strings quietly, contacting an internal liaison who agreed to review her compiled files. Even then, she had to wait 2 more days for Interpol to respond. And during that time, Ryan was still free, smiling at hotel staff, tipping bellboys, possibly preparing his escape. Lucia slept barely 2 hours each night, watching from across the resort lobby with a notepad in hand. Every time Ryan walked past, her stomach tightened with the thought, he's going to get away. And every time that thought crept in, she heard her aunt's voice in her head. "Then do something. Now. The trap was closing. Lucia hadn't just uncovered a murder. She had uncovered a pattern, a method, and a motive that stretched across countries and continents. Ryan was more than a charming liar. He was a professional manipulator, using charm as a weapon and marriage as a means to murder. He had gotten away with it before, but not this time. Not with Lucia watching. Not with her aunt's voice pushing her forward. Ryan Vega wasn't real. Not legally. Not officially. Not in any government database that mattered. As Lucia dug deeper, she confirmed what the private investigator had already suspected. Ryan was a fabrication, a carefully crafted identity built from half-truths, expired documents, and lies told so often they sounded like facts. His real name? Still unclear. But what was now obvious? Ryan, or whoever he truly was, had spent years building personas the same way others built resumes. Each identity had a purpose. Each lie had a timeline. And every one of them ended with a dead woman and a clean exit. Lucia's contacts at Interpol began combing through missing persons reports, international marriage certificates, and death records across Southeast Asia, Europe, and Latin America. What emerged was a chilling pattern. In 2018, a wealthy widow named Claire Delacroix, age 59, died in Bordeaux, France, just 6 weeks after marrying a charming bartender named Julian Mendez. Her will have been updated shortly before her death. No one was ever charged. In 2020, Cecilia Hart, age 61, a retired American professor living in Thailand, drowned while on a boat trip with her new husband, Marco Rivera. Her body was cremated before her family could request a second autopsy. In 2022, Elena Vargas, a Spanish real estate investor living in the Philippines, collapsed during dinner with her new partner, Alejandro Cruz. The cause? Sudden cardiac arrest. But her toxicology report was missing from the final case file. All three men shared similar features. All three used variations of the same birth date. And in every case, money quietly moved into offshore accounts days after the women died. Lucia stared at the faces in the reports. The same smirk, the same intense stare. Slightly different hair, new tattoos, a new name, but always the same predator. She wasn't chasing a grieving husband. She was tracking a global serial fraudster and a killer. Meanwhile, back in Tulum, Ryan remained calm. He packed lightly, smiled at staff, even gave a generous tip to the concierge. To those around him, he looked like a heartbroken man trying to move on. But to Lucia, he looked like a ghost preparing to vanish. She received a message from a source inside the embassy. Ryan had booked a flight to Argentina under a false identity. His ticket showed departure in 48 hours. She didn't have time to wait for red tape. She had to act. Lucia pulled every string she had. She contacted Interpol, the FBI's international liaison, and even reached out to families of previous victims she'd identified. They were angry, and they were ready to speak. One woman, Claire Delacroix's niece, broke down when Lucia called. We knew it wasn't an accident, but no one believed us. The police said he was clean. They said it was just a tragic love story. Lucia responded with calm conviction. It wasn't love. It was murder, and it's time someone stopped him. In just 24 hours, an emergency international watch alert was issued for Ryan's alias and known facial profile. Mexican officials were briefed. His hotel room was quietly flagged. But Ryan had already gone quiet. His phone was off. His luggage gone. He had vanished from the resort. Lucia's heart dropped. Had she missed him by hours? Then came a break. A shuttle driver recognized Ryan's photo. He had dropped him at a small private airstrip just outside Cancun that morning. Ryan was trying to bypass commercial customs entirely, a tactic he had likely used before. That's when the full coordination between Interpol and Mexican authorities kicked in. A team was dispatched to the airfield. Border alerts were activated, and Lucia, despite not being a cop, was invited to observe the operation from a distance. She stood inside a tinted surveillance van parked just off the airstrip, headphones on, hands trembling slightly as she listened to radio chatter in Spanish. The air smelled faintly of engine fuel and damp tropical heat, but her mind barely registered it. Lucia's heart pounded against her ribs like a warning drum. She wasn't law enforcement, but she knew predators, and she knew that if Ryan sensed even the smallest disturbance, he'd vanish. Again, the authorities had set up a perimeter, posing as mechanics and airport staff. A drone hovered silently above, watching the perimeter. The plane, a sleek white jet, sat waiting with stairs lowered, doors open. Ryan was due any minute. Then came the first scare. A man exited a black SUV, pulling a suitcase. Tall, lean, sunglasses. Lucia's breath caught. But it wasn't him. False alarm. She exhaled sharply, pressing her palms against her knees to steady herself. The minutes dragged. Every second felt like it might be the one where everything collapsed. If Ryan had even a whisper of a tip-off, if he sensed something off in the hotel lobby, noticed a strange glance from a concierge, or even felt Lucia's eyes linger too long, he'd run. Then, finally, confirmation. Visual on target, one officer said over the radio. Approaching jet. Lucia moved to the edge of the van's open door. Through binoculars, she saw him. Ryan, calm, collected, rolling his bag like a man about to board a flight to paradise. Sunglasses, gray t-shirt, the same smirk she remembered from the resort. She held her breath. Wait for it, the officer whispered. Ryan reached the bottom step. Go. In an instant, the scene erupted. Agents from both sides moved in with practice speed. Command shouted. Guns raised. Officers flooded the tarmac like a wave crashing down. Ryan froze, suitcase slipping from his hand. Ryan didn't resist, but he didn't look afraid either. He slowly turned his head toward the agents with a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then his gaze shifted, just for a moment, toward the line of trees beyond the tarmac, as if he was already imagining another beach, another identity. His final words, before they cuffed him, were whispered almost casually. "There's always another widow." Lucia didn't move, didn't blink. She watched the arrest unfold like a silent film, the final act of a play she never wanted to star in, but one she refused to let end unfinished. This wasn't just about Camilla anymore. This was about every woman he had deceived, used, and discarded. Underscore. At 6:17 p.m. local time, Ryan arrived at the airfield in a black SUV. He stepped out in sunglasses and a gray t-shirt, rolling a small suitcase. Calm, collected. He didn't know he was already surrounded. As he approached the plane, law enforcement moved in. Guns drawn. Commands shouted in Spanish and English. Ryan dropped his bag. For the first time, he froze. No fake tears. No charm. Just silence. He was arrested without a struggle. Inside his bag, *2 passports, each under a different name. Over $75,000 in cash. A burner phone with encrypted messaging apps. And a flash drive labeled documents. He had planned to disappear. Again, but this time, Lucia had beaten him to the finish line. Ryan Vega sat in a cold, windowless holding cell in Cancun for 3 days before authorities confirmed his extradition. By then, he had already stopped talking. Not to police, not to the embassy, not to his court-appointed attorney. Silence was his new weapon, but it wouldn't protect him this time. Thanks to Lucia's coordination with Interpol, Mexican officials, and the FBI, Ryan was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and premeditated murder connected to 4 women across 3 countries. Camilla's death was the first to be prosecuted, but it wouldn't be the last. He was extradited to the United States under an international treaty. There, the case took shape quickly, and the story of a charming young man who married and murdered women for money spread like wildfire. Lucia didn't want the media attention, but she understood its value. The moment news outlets ran headlines like, "Beach wedding turns deadly. Grieving niece exposes serial killer groom. He married, he inherited, they died, but one woman fought back." Families from across the globe started reaching out. By the time the trial date was set, dozens of tips had come in, linking Ryan, or his aliases, to suspicious deaths in France, Spain, Thailand, and the Philippines. The prosecution focused first on Camilla Torres' case, the one with the clearest trail. The revised will, the bank transfers, the fake identity, the toxicology results, which, thanks to Lucia's insistence, had been run a second time, revealing trace amounts of sedatives in her system. That alone contradicted the original accidental drowning claim. Ryan's defense team tried to frame him as a grieving husband. They claimed Camilla was vulnerable, emotional, and acted on her own free will. They argued there was no definitive proof he had tampered with her medication, no eyewitnesses to the act, and no physical violence. But the jury didn't need blood to see the truth. They saw a pattern, cold, calculated, and disturbingly consistent. Lucia sat through every day of the trial. She listened to prosecutors paint the picture she already knew too well. She watched as they displayed the falsified marriage certificates, the timeline of the insurance policy changes, and the grainy surveillance footage of Ryan deleting digital records from Camilla's hotel room laptop. She clenched her jaw when he refused to make eye contact. She never looked away. Then came the testimonies. Claire Delacroix's niece flew in from France. Elena Vargas' sister from Spain. One by one, the families of Ryan's former victims stood before the court and described their grief, the suddenness of the deaths, and the eerie similarities. Quick romance, a wedding, then a tragic accident. Each story reinforced the last. Each tier added weight to the prosecution's case. And each witness made it harder for the jury to see Ryan as anything other than what he truly was, a predator who weaponized affection. The final blow came when forensic analysts revealed that Ryan's fingerprints were found on the inside of a prescription bottle in Camilla's luggage, a bottle that contained sedatives, not her prescribed heart medication. It was enough. After 5 weeks of testimony, 67 exhibits, and 12 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. Lucia sat perfectly still as the words were read. She didn't cry. She didn't clap. She just closed her eyes and exhaled, like someone finally coming up for air. Ryan showed no emotion, no remorse, just a quiet resignation that his game was over. At sentencing, the judge spared no words. You are not simply a con man. You are a calculated murderer who used trust as a weapon. You've left a trail of death, grief, and betrayal across continents. And you did it without lifting a knife or firing a gun. That, in many ways, is more chilling. Ryan was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His days of changing names, charming victims, and disappearing without a trace were done. As Lucia walked out of the courtroom into the sunlight, she felt the weight of her aunt's death, but also the strength of her legacy. Camilla hadn't died for nothing. Lucia had made sure of it. Lucia Torres returned to Madrid a different person. Her aunt was gone. The trial was over. Ryan Vega, the man who had stolen her life and tried to vanish into another, was behind bars for good. But Lucia's mind didn't rest. Justice had been served in court, yes. But that didn't erase the pain. It didn't bring Camilla back. And it didn't stop the next woman from being targeted by someone like him. That thought haunted her. Camilla had spent her life building something meaningful. Restaurants, jobs, a reputation. She was smart, self-made, and cautious. And yet, in the end, she'd still been manipulated, still been vulnerable. Lucia realized something that stayed with her. Predators don't always break into your home. Sometimes they walk in smiling, holding your hand. So, she made a decision. She would build something, too. Not in Camilla's name, but in her spirit. Within 6 months, Lucia founded the Red Veil Project, a nonprofit organization focused on helping middle-aged and older women recognize signs of financial, emotional, and romantic exploitation. It offered legal support, emotional counseling, and digital safety education for women who had been manipulated in personal relationships. The name was symbolic. Camilla had been married in a soft red shawl. Lucia kept it with her now, folded her nightstand drawer. The project began small, a website, a newsletter, a few workshops in community centers. But within a year, it had grown into a national initiative. Women from all over the world, widows, divorcees, retirees, began sharing their stories. Some had lost money. Others had escaped dangerous men just in time. A few, like Camilla, hadn't been so lucky. Lucia gave interviews, stood on stages, and met with lawmakers. She pushed for changes in how international romance scams and inheritance fraud were investigated. She fought for better cross-border data sharing between law enforcement agencies. She spoke clearly, firmly, never sensationalizing what had happened. He didn't just kill my aunt, she said once in an interview. He built a system of lies that preyed on trust. And no one saw it until it was too late. She never mentioned Ryan by name again. He didn't deserve it. Instead, she focused on survivors, on prevention, on legacy. Camilla's story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about belief. She had believed in love, even late in life. believed that people could change, believed she was finally being seen for who she really was. That belief had been exploited, but now, because of Lucia, it would protect others. Every year on the anniversary of Camilla's death, Lucia returned to Tulum. She didn't go to the resort. She didn't walk past room 304. She simply stood on the shoreline at sunrise, barefoot, watching the light stretch across the water, just like her aunt had once done. And in the quiet, she would whisper, "I got him, and I made sure you weren't forgotten." Because in the end, Camilla wasn't just a victim. She was a wake-up call, a warning, a symbol of strength. And thanks to Lucia, her legacy lived on, not in fear, but in action. Months later, on a rainy evening in Madrid, Lucia sat alone by the window of her small apartment overlooking the quiet street below. The clinking of cafe cups from a downstairs bistro filtered faintly through the glass. Her laptop was open but idle. Next to it, a framed photo of Camilla, laughing, vibrant, caught mid-toast in a moment of pure joy. Lucia held a glass of Rioja, untouched, swirling slowly in her hand. An email had just come in. She'd read it twice already. It was from a woman in Argentina, widowed, 58, nearly scammed by a man she'd met on a cruise. She had watched Lucia's interview online. She had joined the Red Veil Project's online forum. She had walked away before it was too late. The final lines struck a chord. "Your aunt saved my life, even though she never knew me. And so did you." Lucia closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry. Not the angry, righteous tears she had shed during the investigation, but quiet ones. Grief had hardened her into something fierce. Now it softened, just a little, into something human. She stood, walked to her bookshelf, and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was Camilla's red wedding shawl, folded neatly. She had kept it since the trial, never able to let it go. Lucia unfolded it now and draped it around her shoulders. It still smelled faintly of sea salt and sandalwood. She lifted her glass toward the photo. "To you," she whispered. "You trusted love, and it cost you everything. But you taught me how to fight for truth. And because of you, I found my voice." She took a slow sip. The wine was bold, full of warmth and depth, just like Camilla's cooking always had been. Outside, the rain eased. And inside, Lucia finally felt something close to peace. In the months that followed Ryan Vega's conviction, the world moved on. The headlines faded. The trial left the front pages. But the questions it raised never really disappeared, at least not for Lucia. She found herself thinking often about how it had all begun. A smile across a hotel bar. A few kind words. A glass of tequila and a man who seemed to understand her aunt better than anyone had in years. Camilla hadn't been foolish. She hadn't been desperate. She was lonely. And loneliness, Lucia realized, wasn't weakness. It was human. Ryan had preyed on that. Not just in Camilla, but in every woman before her. He'd identified their vulnerability and tailored himself to fit their needs. He never had to force his way in. They let him in because he made them feel seen. That was the scariest part. It wasn't a gun. It wasn't a knife. It was trust. This wasn't rare. It wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern, a warning. And Lucia knew how dangerous silence could be. As she once said, "What killed my aunt wasn't love. It was silence." Lucia didn't blame Camilla. She loved her too deeply to ever turn that love into blame. But she wanted others to learn from what happened. Because this story wasn't rare. It wasn't an anomaly. It was just one version of something that happens every day on dating apps, in online chats, during vacations, through introductions that seem harmless until they're not. Camilla had believed she found something real, and Ryan had used that belief to kill her. But he didn't get away with it, because someone refused to stay quiet. Now, every time Lucia stood on stage, looked across a room of women nodding slowly as she spoke, she knew that Camilla's death had not been in vain. Because Camilla's name wasn't just etched into a gravestone anymore. It was etched into legislation, into education, into every woman who walked away from something that didn't feel right, and into every survivor who chose to speak up, even if no one believed them at first. Underscore. This story began with a beach wedding, a second chance at love, a promise whispered too sweetly to be real. It ended in a courtroom, with truth on the record, and justice finally catching up to a man who thought he was untouchable. But in between, there was something else. A niece who saw through the lies, who trusted her instincts, who turned grief into purpose. Lucia didn't just expose a killer. She exposed the myth that smart women can't be fooled. She reminded the world that anyone can fall for the wrong person, and anyone, no matter how broken, can rise again and fight for what's right. If this story leaves behind any lesson, let it be this. Love should never cost your voice. Trust should never silence your instincts. And if something feels wrong, say something before silence becomes the final word. Camilla's story is over, but her voice, through Lucia, is louder than ever. 3 weeks later, in a small town outside Lisbon, Portugal, a woman named Teresa Soares checked into a coastal villa resort. Recently widowed, 63 years old, and heir to her late husband's shipping business, she came looking for solitude. The bartender was young, dark-haired, charming. He introduced himself as Mateo Cruz. He offered her a drink on the house the first night. By the second night, he remembered her favorite. By the third, he complimented her eyes, said they reminded him of his late mother's. He didn't rush. He never did. His tone was soft, attentive. He asked about her family, her business, her childhood dog. He laughed when she told stories. He listened deeply. Teresa smiled more that week than she had in months. What she didn't know was that someone was already watching him. Lucia. Through her work with the Red Veil Project, Lucia had begun compiling a private alert system, voluntary networks of women sharing stories, dates, names, patterns. One of her volunteers in Portugal had flagged a familiar face under a new name. Lucia received the photo on a rainy Tuesday. Same jawline, same eyes, different name. She didn't hesitate. This time, she wasn't chasing a ghost. She was following a pattern, and she was ahead of it. As Teresa laughed softly at the bar, swirling a wine glass between her fingers, Mateo leaned in. And just beyond the hedge-lined courtyard, a pair of local detectives quietly took their positions. Because thanks to Camilla, the next woman wouldn't have to die.